So in the previous section, we examined four methods of voting: the plurality method, the board account method, the plurality with elimination method, and the pairwise comparison method. And each one of these methods is used to determine a winning candidate of an election. However, in this section, we are introduced to criterion that will help determine the fairness of each of these election methods. And the first criterion we will examine is the majority criterion. And if you recall from the previous section, we were introduced to the majority criterion, which states that if a candidate is preferred by a majority of first choice votes, and of course a majority is more than 50% of the votes, then that candidate should win. So this example states, the table shows the preference table for an election with candidates John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Decide which candidate would be chosen with each of the following voting methods. Then determine if the method used violates the majority criterion. So we're going to check to see if these methods violate the majority criterion. And since we're talking about a majority, what we'll do is we'll check to see if a candidate here has a majority. So a majority would be, well, we first have to count up the votes here. So we have 13 here, 11 here, that's 24, 16 here, that's 40, and then 15 here, that's 55. So 50% or more of those would be considered a majority. So 28, I'm just going to write it right here. A candidate with 28 or more votes has a majority, and according to the majority criterion, that candidate should win. So we can see right here, George, has 13 first choice votes, and right here he's got 15, so there's 28 right there. So George has a majority, so I'm just going to underline him. So in order to see the fairness for these methods here, using the majority criterion, we can ask ourselves, if a candidate has a majority, can another candidate win the election using any one of these methods? So can another candidate win the election using A, the plurality method? Now we know George has a majority, but can another candidate win using the plurality method? And the answer to that is no, that's not possible. A plurality is whichever candidate has the most first choice votes, and no other candidate can have more votes than the one who has a majority. So this is not possible. So right here, I'm just going to put down does not violate. So this method, voting method, the plurality method, does not violate the majority criterion. So then we'll ask the same question for the board account method. If a candidate has a majority, can another candidate win the election using the board account method? Well, that's something that we'll have to check out. So if you recall from the board account method, we assign points to each one of these choices here. So since we have four choices, I'm going to award 4 points to a first choice selection, 3 points here, 2 points here, and then 1 point here. Then we'll go through each one of these candidates and award them the points for each choice that they have here. So we'll start with John. And we could see John has no first choice votes, so we won't worry about that. John right here has 16 second choice votes, so we will award 3 points for every second choice vote. So we'll do 3 times 16. So we could see here John has 13 third choice votes and 15 here. So John has a total of 28 third choice votes. We award 2 points. So that'll be 2 times 28. And then right here, John has 11 fourth choice votes and we award 1 point. So we'll do 1 times 11. We then go ahead and tally all this up. And this is 115 points. So using the board account method, John has 115 points. We'll then do Paul. Paul has 11 first choice votes. 11 gets 4 points. So we'll do 4 times 11. Paul has 15 second choice votes. That gets 3 points. 3 times 15. Paul has 16 third choice votes. That gets 2 points. And Paul has 13 fourth choice votes for 1 point each. And of course, we tally it all up, and Paul gets 134 points using the Borda method. Now we'll do George, and George we know has the majority, but we'll do George. George has 13 and 15, of course, so that's 4 times 28. George does not have any second choice votes, so we won't worry about that. George has 11 third choice votes. That gets 2 points each. And George has 16 fourth choice. We tally all that up, and it comes out to be 150 points. And then finally we have Ringo. Ringo has 16 first choice votes. That's 4 times 16. Ringo has 13 plus 11 second choice votes. That's 24. He gets 3 points for each one. Ringo does not get any third choice votes, so we won't worry about it. And then, of course, Ringo has 15 fourth choice votes here. Of course, we tally it all up, and this comes out to be 151 points. So look at that. According to the board account method, Ringo would win the election. So since the board account method produces a different winner than the majority, then we can say that the board account method can violate the majority criterion. Now, that doesn't mean that every time the board account method will. It just means that it can. And in this case, it actually did. So we move on to C, and we do the same thing. If a candidate has a majority, can another candidate win the election using the plurality with elimination method? Now, this method is designed specifically to address the majority criterion. If there is no candidate with a majority, then a series of elimination rounds is used until a majority is achieved. But we already have a majority here, so George is the majority, so the plurality with elimination method does not, I'll just put it right here, does not violate the majority criterion. And finally, again, if a candidate has a majority, can another candidate win the election using the pairwise comparison method? So we'll give it a try. But keep in mind that if a candidate holds a majority, then that candidate will always beat any other candidate in a head-to-head comparison. But we'll go ahead and we'll check it out anyways. So now if you recall, we have to pair up the candidates, and to be able to determine how many pairings there's going to be, we use the formula n times n minus 1 divided by 2. N is the number of candidates. We have John, Paul, George, and Ringo. So that's going to be 4 times 4 minus 1, which of course is 3, divided by 2. That's 12 divided by 2, so there's going to be 6 pairings. So we'll pair up John versus Paul, John versus George, John versus Ringo, Paul versus George, Paul versus Ringo, and then George versus Ringo. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pairings. And if you recall, whoever has the higher, who's ever ranked higher than the other candidate is awarded a point. So we can see John and Paul. John is higher than Paul here, so he gets 13. And John is higher than Paul here, so that's 16. 16 and 13, that's 29. So John actually wins here. So I'll just put a check mark there. Now we know George has the majority. So George will always be higher than whoever they're ranked up against. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a check under George. We could also see that George is going to be higher than Paul because George has a majority. And then George versus Ringo here. So we can see that George has 1, 2, 3. He's got 3 points. So it isn't possible for anybody else to get more points than 3 because George beats John over here, even though John gets a point here, but he loses to George. So George is going to be the winner. So the pairwise comparison method does not violate the majority criterion. So the only method that violates the majority criterion is the board account. And there we go.